Okay, today we're going to be learning Taanit Daf Tet. This week's daf is sponsored by Pamela Kaplan in loving memory of the 17th year side of her father, David Kaplan, David Abba ben Aharon. And today's daf is sponsored by Betsy and Tevi Melman in loving memory of Gittel Leah Bat Moshe David, Gloria Melman on her yahrzeit today. May her memory be blessed. Today's daf is also sponsored anonymously in loving memory of Abraham ben Victoria. And today's daf is sponsored in loving memory of my grandfather, Joseph Cohen, Yosef ben Moshe Cohen, Zichrono Livracha, on his yahrzeit. Just to clarify, I made one error. Betsy's and Tavi Melman's dedication is actually for the memory of the yahrzeit was yesterday, not today. Okay, we are going to start on the bottom of Chet Amud Bet. So we had this issue of, we started with a whole bunch of statements. We had, if you remember, the rains are as great as all sorts of things. We compared it to the creation of the world. We compared it to Taanit. We compared it to, I'm blanking. There's another. Then we compared it at the end of yesterday's daf. I don't remember all of them, but kibbutz. We compared it to kibbutz galuyot. And then we compared it to, the ingathering of the exiles. Then we compared it to afilu gaya sepaskapa. We said, what a great day. Even wars stop, right? We know how hard it is to stop wars, unfortunately. Even wars stop when the rains come. And these are a bunch of these statements were made by Rabbi Yochanan. So we're going to have some more continuing stories with Rabbi Yochanan. We ended with the statement of Rabbi Yochanan that it says the real reason why, or one of the reasons why the rain stopped is because people say they're going to give charity and then they don't. Okay, and with that, we have a verse to prove it. And now Rabbi Yochanan is going to continue. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, my dichtiv, if he's already talking about charity, my dichtiv aser to aser. When it talks about tithing your produce, which is a form of charity, basically, because it's giving stuff to the people, the Kohanim and the Leviim, who don't have their own fields. And in addition, there's also Maaser Ani, which we give to poor people in general. But anyway, Aser to Aser, which is like giving charity. Aser b'shvil shetitashel. Why does it say that double language? Aser to Aser. It's a very famous drasha. Give, the tithes or give charity so that you'll become wealthy. In other words, if you give charity, God will help you to become wealthy. It's obviously a way to encourage people who felt like this is a big financial loss, and they're basically saying, well, God will reward you. We saw this similar with people who use their food, the food that they decide to, everything is determined from the beginning of the year, other than how much food you're going to have for the holidays, The more you give, the more you'll get, etc. Okay, now Rabbi Yochanan has a situation where he's with the child of Rish Lakish, who happens to be his nephew. Why is that? Well, famous story. I'll give you a little bit of the background in case you don't recall. There's a famous story of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, which is Rish Lakish was a big robber and not a great guy. And he sees Rabbi Yochanan's reflection in the water, and he sees how beautiful he is, and he thinks he's a woman, and he dives in after him. And Rabbi Yochanan says to him, wow, if your strength were put to Torah, what an amazing thing. And Rish Lakish basically decides to go start learning. And Rabbi Yochanan promises also his sister. He says, you can marry my sister, which he does, which is why Rish Lakish's son is his nephew. And in the end of their life, they get into a bit of a thing, and Rabbi Yochanan they have this machloket, and Rabbi Yochanan reminds him that he used to be a robber, and Rish Lakish gets very upset. And in the end, basically, they have this thing, and Rabbi Yochanan kind of looks at him, and then Rish Lakish gets weak and dies. And then Rabbi Yochanan's very sad after that, because he says, very famous line, O chevruta, o mituta, either I have chevruta or I'm going to die. And we talked about that the other day when we talked about the importance of chevruta. And he basically, and he struggles after that because he really misses Rish Lakish. Okay, so now we have, in light of that story, we're going to read this story. So we're going to see two stories. One of them is going to connect back. So Rabbi Yochanan sees the son of Rish Lakish, Amar le, Emali psukecha. This always goes on when people meet young children. They say, kids are obviously learning Tanakh. So he says, tell me what pasuk you're up to. Amar le, aser to aser. He says, I'm learning about that pasuk, which means tithe your produce. Amar le, uma aser to aser. So the son of Rish Lakish, after he quotes the pasuk, he says, I don't really understand. Why does it say it in this language? Amar le asel b'shvil shetitashel, right? It's a play on words, right? By the way, this is based on the fact that a sin and a shin are the same letter. It's just a matter where you put the dot. And obviously in the Torah, there are no dots. So, you could say, oh, it's aser te'ashel. Okay, you will become wealthy. Amar le minalach. So the kid, wise Alec kid, he says, well, how do you know that's really true? Right? It's a classic kid question, right? Sometimes adults sort of take things, okay, we understand, or we understand that, it doesn't really mean it literally, but the kid says, how do you know really? Everyone who brings masra, right? It seems to not actually be true when you look around the world, right? Not everybody who gives charity becomes wealthy. So Amar le zil neseh. He says, try it out and see if it works, right? You can test God and see if it really is true. Amar le, the kid says, wait a minute, didn't we learn that you're not allowed to test God? V'haktiv, it says in the pasuk in Dvarim, lo tinasu et Hashem Elokechem kasher nisitem b'masa. Don't test God the way you tested God in Masa and said, if you're going to give us, then great, and if not, we're not with you. Like, you can't do that. You can't test God and say, are you going to give me or not? So he says, Amar le hachi amar Rabbi Yoshai. Says, well, Rabbi Yoshai, who was Rabbi Yochanan's teacher, told me the following. Chutz mizo, other than this. Okay, when you say that pasuk, don't test God, and don't test him on anything else, but you can test him in this area. Shenema, how do I know this? Because he's going to quote a pasuk in Malachi right now, which is going to explain it. It says, Haviu et kol ha'maser al beit ha'otzar, bring all the masrot to the storage house. V'hi teref bebeiti, ubachanu, and then there will be food in my house. Okay, meaning if you do this, you'll be prosperous. Ubachanuni gam bazot amar Hashem tzvot, and test me on this issue, God says. Im lo eftach lachem et arubot hashamayim, there's a famous song, if I don't open the heavens for you, varikoti lachem bracha ad bli dai. In other words, test me on this. If you do this, I will open up the heavens and they will pour out so much rain ad bli dai. Okay, these words don't really make sense. I'm not going to really translate them. The Gemara is going to say, and this is actually part of the song, my ad bli dai. What does it mean, ad bli dai? Amara mi barchama amarav ad shivlu siftei techem milamar dai. Until your lips are already worn out from saying enough, 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 enough. Okay, like die, like dayenu. So basically, God is saying, test me on this one. If you tithe your produce, I promise I will open up the heavens, bring tons of rain, so much rain that you're going to start saying, stop the rain, stop the rain, stop the rain, so much that your lips are going to have such trouble. Some people talk about the fact that, I have some speech therapists here, right? So that the word die doesn't actually use your lips at all. When you say die, 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 you don't even use your lips. And there's a bit of a whole question they get into about that, but I assume they don't mean this literally, right? So in any case, they basically say, right? He says, that's your proof that you can actually test God on this issue. By the way, this is a bit of I'll already kind of give you a sneak preview. This is reminiscent of the story of Choni HaMagel that we're going to see in the Mishnah in a little while, which talks about, it's in this Masechet, where basically he asked for rain and then it's too much rain, right? And they say, enough rain, don't bring so much rain, right? You have to be careful what you wish for, how much you wish for. So that's what this is saying, which actually is almost maybe saying, don't test me, because, if you test me in this, you're going to have so much rain that you're going to say, whoa, that's too much rain and it's ruining the crops, and maybe. But Rabbi Yochanan understands this literally, that you can actually test God on this issue. So now what's this reaction of the son of Rish Lakish? He says, Amar le, ihavet mate hatam, if I had gotten to that pasuk in my learning, lahai psuka, if I reached that pasuk, lo v'tzricha lo shaya rabach, I wouldn't need you or Hoshaya, your rabbi. Question was, when he says this statement, is he being disrespectful, right? He almost sounds like it, because he doesn't say ule Rav Hoshaya, your rabbi. He does call him his rabbi, but he doesn't say ule Rav Hoshaya. He says, oh, I wouldn't need you and I wouldn't need Hoshaya, your rabbi. Or is he saying that pasuk makes it very obvious and I agree with you? In other words, I'm not going to argue with the way you read that pasuk because it's very clear. So either it's a positive statement, or maybe he's mocking him a little and saying, oh, I didn't need you to tell me that, but it's unclear exactly his reaction. So now, right, this is where you need the tone in which he said it that would have helped us to understand what exactly, how was it said. Another story bumps into the nephew, right, his nephew, the son of Rish Lakish. de yativ amal. He quotes the following pasuk. Okay, it's a pasuk from Mishlei, Proverbs. Ivelet adam tisalef darko. Okay, the foolishness of a person will basically set him off the path. Va'al Hashem yiz'af libo, but in the end he'll get angry at God. It's his own foolishness that caused him this, but he's going to blame God for it. Yatev Rabbi Yochanan b'kamatame. Rabbi Yochanan hears him say this pasuk, and this time instead of the student asking the question, Rabbi Yochanan asks the question, and he says, "Amal mi ikamide dichtive b'ktuve deloramize be'oraita." Is there something like this that's written in our writings, the ktuvim, right, in Mishlei, that isn't? There's no allusion to it in the Torah. In other words, most of these things that it comes up in Mishlei, don't do this, don't do that. You could see someone who messed that up in the Torah, but this one there is none. Amar le atuha milo remize. So now comes this smart, nephew of Rabbi Yochanan. He says, "Is there no hint to this in the Torah? I'll show you." Vakti, it says in a verse. This is in the brothers of Yosef when they go down to Egypt, and then Yosef puts the goblet in Binyamin's bag, and then they chase after them, and then the brothers look through their bags and they find it sitting there in Binyamin's bag, and they say the following. Vayetze libam, right? Their hearts go out, panic. Vayichridu ish el achiv lemor. They got nervous and they said to each other, Ma zot asa Elohim lanu. What did God do to us? Really, they're to blame, right? They're the ones who sold Yosef to Mitzrayim, to wherever they sold him, right? To the Ishmaelim, the Midianim, etc. But they're the ones who sold him, threw him in a pit, sold him. It was their fault, and yet they're blaming God. So comes the nephew of Rish Lakish, and he says, the nephew of Rabbi Yochanan, he says, look, there's your pasuk. It's exactly what it says in Mishnah. So he kind of, Rabbi Yochanan now, what's Rabbi Yochanan's reaction? Dal ene v'chazebe. He lifts up his eyes and he looks at him. Okay, now, this is how he killed Rish Lakish in the first place, by looking at him. Now, most people understand that when he looked at him in amazement. Like, wow, you understood something that I didn't get. Okay. Why do you have to lift his eyes? So Rashi explains that based on a Gemara in Bava Kama, his eyelids covered his eyes, like his eyes were strange or something about it. I don't exactly get it, but it's actually very unpleasant to think about, but it says he had to open his eyes with little forks made of silver. Like he had to kind of keep them open. Okay. And that's what it meant, dal ene. Okay. This, I would have, without reading Rashi and based on this other Gemara, I would have assumed, right, that they drooped, but I would have assumed it was just, he looked at him, right? There's always these stories in the Gemara where somebody looks at someone. And the question is with what? So Rashi explains, he wanted to see him because he was harif, because he said, wow, this is a really smart child. Okay. But what happens? Ati ime afikte. His mother comes in right away. And what does she do? She grabs her son and takes him out of the room immediately. Amrle, Tamikame, go away from Rabbi Yochanan to Loli Avilach Kedavilavuch. So he doesn't do what he did to your father. Okay, she's nervous. She sees the power of Rabbi Yochanan, and when he looks at someone and what could happen, and she says, I do not want this to happen to you. Bad enough, my husband died this way. And she says, his power is a little bit scary, right? And yes, she's scared of her own brother. But you could see why, right? It's a very tragic story, right? And according to Rashi, he was actually looking in a positive way, but she didn't know that. And, theoretically, he could have been looking, and it's possible he was looking in a jealous way right here. And here Rabbi Yochanan actually almost is embarrassed, you could think, because the kid knew something that he didn't know. And we're going to talk about this later. This theme is going to come up later in the daf about rabbis being embarrassed when they don't know things. And really, maybe he was looking at him in that kind of a way, or she was at least concerned that maybe he was, and she, gets him out of there very fast. Interesting story. You think of Rabbi Yochanan as this great gadol, but here, he had a certain power, and this was, was scary. So yeah, especially to use on his own relatives. So, okay, we are now going to move on, but we'll come back to this idea of rabbis being embarrassed further on in the daf. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, another statement he makes. Matar b'shvil yachid, parnasa b'shvil rabim. Rain can come on behalf of an individual, but parnasa, but sustenance, which, okay, we'll talk about what's the difference between rain and sustenance. It's not 100% clear. Sustenance only comes, God will bring it only for the multitudes, okay, not for individuals. So rain can come for an individual, and we're going to prove this very soon, but parnasah only comes for Rabbi. What's the difference? Is it rain, parnasah, like we say, v'tein taldu matar, the bracha, in the blessing that's all about parnasah, sustenance. So either rain is in a smaller sense, and when we mean sustenance, we mean a lot, like in abundance. Rain is just a small amount maybe, and parnasah is abundance. Some people say rain is in a natural way, but sustenance God could bring in a miraculous way, but that he'll only do for the multitudes. And in fact, you're going to see that the pasuk they used to prove it is the man that fell, the manna, right, which fell in the desert in a miraculous way. So maybe the parnasah is something that's miraculous rather than through natural means. So it's unclear. The commentaries disagree about what exactly this is. Matar b'shvil yachid dichtiv. How do we know that rain comes up for an individual? It says, Yiftach Hashem lecha et otzaro hatov. God will open for you. This is in Sefer Dvarim, the end of when it talks about the brachot and the klalot. God will open for you, individual. It's a singular form. His big otzar, right, his treasure. Latet matar tzachah, to bring rain. So there you see, it'll come for an individual. Parnasah b'shvil rabin dichtiv. Hineni mamtir lachem lechem. Here's from the man. God says, I'm going to bring down to you, okay, you have to know Hebrew, lachem rather than lecha. Lachem is for you in plural. I will bring for you bread, right? And that's the man. Meitive. So now the Gemara brings a question on Rabbi Yochanan from a Braita. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it'll take us a little while to get there, but we're basically going to say the main thing, just so that you don't get lost in the flow, is that we're going to see that on behalf of Moshe, the man came down. So that means it came on behalf of an individual, not a community. Okay, which you might say that's not exactly individual, and that's exactly what the Gemara is going to answer. But right now it's going to sound like for the merits of Moshe, the parnasah came. And here it says only for the community and not for an individual's merits. So here we're going to read, Shlosha parnasim tovim amdu Yisrael. There were three great leaders who basically were able to sustain the Jewish people and bring them what they needed. Who were those? Elohen, Moshe, Aharon, Miriam. V'shalosh matanot tovot nitnu al yadam. Okay, so the three of them, there were gifts, each brought a gift to the people. Elohen, Be'el, Ve'anan, Uman. Okay, the well of Miriam, the clouds came on behalf, right? The Ananei Kavod, the clouds of glory that were surrounded the Jewish people and protected them in the desert, were from Aharon, and the man came from Moshe. Be'er b'schut Miriam, Amud Anan b'schut Aharon, Man b'schut Moshe. Okay, that's what I just said. Now we're going to read. Meita Miriam nistaleka be'er, right? How do we know this be'er was connected with Miriam? Because as soon as Miriam dies, what happens? Shene'emar v'tamat shem Miriam, uchtiv batrei v'lo haya mayim le'edah. There must have been this well that was giving them water. As soon as she dies, they start saying, we don't have water. That's when the whole story happens with the rock and hitting the rock, and instead of speaking to the rock. Okay. V'chazra b'schut shnehem. But in the end, the water comes back. Why? Because of the merits of Moshe and Aaron. So they're able to bring it back. Some people question, if that's the case, then why was there no water? In other words, if they had merits, that it should have just continued even when she died. But the point is that they wanted everyone to know that it was B'schut Miriam, and that's why when she died, they had to lose the water, and then they had to get it back. Okay, and that showed that it was her merits that kept the water going. Met Aharon nistakon anei kavod. And this we actually learned in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, for those who learned Rosh Hashanah, Shene'emar. Vayishma, okay, so as soon as Aharon dies, the Ananei Kavod disappear. How do we know this? Because it says, Vayishma HaKnani Melech Arad. Okay, the Knani, the king of Arad, heard, and then he came to fight against the Jews. So Mashmu'ah Shama, what did he hear? Shama Shemet Aharon, because it happens right after Aharon dies. He heard that Aharon died, and Nisaku Ananei Kavod. He saw that there were no longer these clouds protecting the Jewish people, and he could get through to them. He thought that means, they're no longer protected. I now have permission to go attack them. And this is how to read this pasuk, which says there at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, this is right before that verse, simple reading of this. The people all saw, ki gava Aharon, ki meaning that Aharon died. Okay? But Amar Rabbi Avao, al tikre vayiru, ela vayerau. Just like right? You can basically, you can change vayiru to vayera'u. You just change the vowels. So vayera'u, just like we changed the sin and the shin, right? So vayera'u means it appeared, okay? Vayera'u, they appeared, meaning they were seen, not they saw. They were seen. Why were they seen? Because the Ananim were no longer there. Kedidarish Rish Lakish, as Rish Lakish says, Dama Rish Lakish, Ki Mishamesh Ba'arba Lashonot. Ki could be if, Dilma, maybe, perhaps, Ella, but, or Deha, that, okay? And now we're going to see, what does it mean? They were seen because, right, Deha is because of Gava Aharon. Right, so now it has a totally different meaning. It's not they saw that Aharon died, but they were seen because Aharon had died. And because he had died, the Ananei HaKavod were no longer there. And that's why they were seen by other people. And that's why in the next pasuk, the Melech Knani comes to fight against them. Okay, now, Chazru Shnehem B'schut Moshe. So now they all come back now B'schut Moshe. Mate Moshe, when Moshe dies, Nistalku Kulam. Then everything disappears. How do we know this? Shene'emar, va'achid et shloshet haroim b'yerech echad. Okay, this is a verse from Zechariah, which says that the three shepherds, like the three main shepherds who led the people, they will all die in 1 month. And they assume this is referring to Miriam, Aaron, and Moshe. Now, there's a bit of a problem with this pasuk. V'halo Miriam meta b'Nisan, says in the Torah that she died in the 1st month. Aharon ba'av, as it says in the Torah, he died in the 5th month. Moshe ba'adar, this is known by tradition. It doesn't say so in the Torah, but already you see they died on 3 different months. So it can't be that all 3 died in the same month. So what does it mean they all 3 died in the same month? This proves that Moshe kind of kept them all going. And then they all, right, all the presents that they had gotten, all the merits, their merits, that Moshe then kind of carried till he died, all disappeared in 1 month, which was when Moshe died. And the main point, what do you see from this whole thing? The man came on account of Moshe. To which the Gemara, which is question on Rabbi Yochanan, to which the Gemara answers very simply, Shani Moshe kevan Rabim, hu bae kerabim dame, because his merits were for all the people. The man came for everybody. It's not like the man came just for Moshe. So therefore, it's considered like all the people. We saw this, by the way, in Rosh Hashanah. If you remember, we had, could you use the word pakad, the shoresh pakad, God remembered, for zichronot, for your verses of zichronot in the davening of Rosh Hashanah? And we said, yes, according to one opinion, yes. And then we said, but you can't do a pikadon of an individual. So how do we say Hashem pakad et tzara, which some people had in their version of their davening? And they said, because Hashem pakad et tzara, even though it was an individual, it was for the future of the Jewish people. So it was as if it was l'rabim. Here it's even more clear because he really was, right? The man came for everybody. So therefore it's considered parnasah for rabim, and you can't ask a question on that. Okay, now we get to another question. This goes back to that idea I talked about before about a rabbi potentially being embarrassed for not knowing something. But really this is coming technically in the Gemara because it's got this similarity, because it's going to relate to this pasuk about the people dying, okay, which we had just Aaron and Moshe. We're going to quote this pasuk, okay, so that same pasuk we had before, the 3 ro'im are going to disappear. We're now going to have, that's going to appear in a dream to Rav Papa. We will see. Interesting context. Okay, this is a very interesting story, a little possibly troublesome. Rav Huna bar Manoch, Rav Shmuel bar Idi, Rav Chia mivastanya, havu shrichai kamei de Rava. Okay, they learned with Rava all the time. Kinach nafshei de Rava, when Rava died, okay, again, we're talking about dying and the passing on. It's very similar to the previous story. When he died, atu the kamei de Rav Papa. So they went to learn with Rav Papa instead of Rava. He was, I guess, the next gadol. They went to learn with him. Kol ematava amar lehu shmata v'lo hava mistabra lehu. When he would say something that they didn't really agree with, havu miramze ahadade. They would make faces at each other. Okay, really? You know, is that what this guy is saying? Well, you can imagine how Rav Papa felt when he saw that, right? Don't think he didn't notice. Chalash date. He got very upset, right? He got very sad every time that would happen. Akruye bechelme. So then he has this dream, and in the dream, someone's reading him verses. And the verse they read is, Ba'akchid et shloshet haroim. Okay, I'm going to wipe out the 3 shepherds. which is a reference to these three rabbis who are mocking him almost, or he feels that they're mocking him, whether they were or not. We don't really know, but he has this feeling that they're mocking him, and he has this dream that they're basically going to die. So the question is, what's his reaction and what actually happens? So unfortunately, we're not going to get a good answer to either of those questions because all we're going to see is his reaction, but his reaction is very ambiguous. Okay, we really don't know. And we actually don't ever find out what happens in the story, which is unfortunate. So what happens? When he says goodbye to them the next day, what does he say? Amar lehu lizlu Rabbanan b'shlama. Go, rabbis, in peace. Okay. If anyone remembers, we learned in Masechet Brachot, if you learned Masechet Brachot, that when you speak to someone who's alive, you say lech lishalom, go to peace. And when you speak to someone who's dying or dead, you say lech bishalom, go in peace. So one explanation is that he said, go in peace like a dead person, meaning I know you're going to die and, good riddance. Okay, that's one option. Another option is to say, no, what he's really, so first of all, some people have a different version of the text that it said lech lishalom, and that he was trying to say, I hope this doesn't come true. And a third, interesting, right? You might think, isn't that all the options? The third is that he said, go b'shalom, meaning go out from this room in the hopes that maybe that will be the fulfillment of the dream. And then that will be enough. In other words, just leaving from him would maybe resolve the issue. Whether he meant leave and don't come back or, and that maybe the fulfillment of the dream will happen just in them leaving. And that will basically, and then they won't actually die. So we don't really know, does he wish their death or does he not wish their death? It's really, really unclear. And we don't actually find out what happens to them, which is unfortunate. Another similar story, which really reflects on what's clear here, is that the issue is not what happens to them actually, but it's how Rav Papa felt, that he felt this bad that he could actually have a dream like this. Okay, whether he felt that bad that he actually wanted their death is very hard to really, to really agree with. But, again, these stories are often exaggerated, even if that is really what he meant. It's probably not really what he meant, but, it shows how deeply the pain was inside that he was willing to have them die because he just couldn't take it. Rav Shimi bar Ashi have a shchiach kamei to Rav Papa. Okay, Rav Shimi bar Ashi was often also in his Beit Midrash. Have a makshele tuvi, asked a lot of questions. Yom echad chazi dinafil al ape, right? Rav Papa didn't always have the answers to his questions. So one day Rav Shimi comes in to talk to Rav Papa and he sees Rav Papa on the ground, bowed down, praying. Shamei da'amar, he heard what he said. And what did he say? Rachmana litzla mi kisufa deshimi. God, please help me from the embarrassment that Shimi is causing me because he keeps asking me questions and I don't have the answer. So what was Rav Shimi's reaction? He accepted upon himself a vow of silence, okay? And he stopped asking him questions, okay? Which is also very tragic, right? The stories are really interesting. And what it shows a bunch of things. It shows, number one, it shows Rav Papa and how hard it was to kind of fill the role that Rava had filled before him, right? We know Rava. We know Rav Papa also, but Rava is definitely more famous than Rav Papa. And it was hard for him to go into his shoes, right? That was a challenge. And, there's different ways to react when people ask you questions. You don't know the answer. Some people feel totally humiliated by it. Some people say, listen, I don't know, I just don't know. And that's okay, right? As you say with confidence, kind of okay. Obviously, Rav Shimi must have suffered a little bit from lack of self-confidence. And ad kedei kach, that he has these dreams that these rabbis are going to die. And he prays to God, on this individual prayer, please save me from the embarrassment of Rav Shimi. Okay, again, why is this brought here? Because it's using that same verse, but really why is it brought here is a better question, right? In terms of what's the messaging here. And I think that the messaging is very interesting. First of all, it reminds us of Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish was always asking Rabbi Yochanan difficult questions. It was one of the things that Rabbi Yochanan was so sad about. When Rish Lakish died, he said, I have no one who can challenge me the way Rish Lakish challenged me. He saw it as a positive thing, right? Even though in the end he did kill him. And, he was obviously a little scary person. And, they were a little worried about the nephew. But the idea here is that he understood the value of questions. And Rav Papa was more scared by it and it daunted him. And I think what it's showing here, until these things happened, these students had no idea that they were how Rav Papa was feeling. They probably didn't think he noticed, right? This is like you're sitting in class and, you make fun of the teacher and you don't think the teacher notices, but the teacher does. Teachers have eyes behind their head and all that. And it's all about perspective. And I think it's the same idea about rain, that rain is about perspective, having perspective on, right? You think, like someone told me in shul yesterday that, last year it was really hard for her to say Mashiach Baruch Morida Geshem, because every time it rained, she was having these floods in her house, and that like the rain for some people is really bad, but for other people, if you look at the big picture, right, we need the rain. So it's this issue of seeing the whole picture and realizing that maybe there's something more. Maybe this is all about our connection with God and it's us, right, who's at fault. Like we saw with the sons of Yosef who blamed God. God, why aren't you bringing, right? You could say it like with the rain. Why aren't you bringing rain? But it's our fault. We haven't done our share. And that there's so many different perspectives here, and you have to see the whole picture. And it's hard for us to always see the whole picture. And maybe that's what they're talking about, that, Shimi thought, I'm asking good questions. That's what I'm supposed to do as a student. But he didn't realize the effects it was having on Rav Papa. And maybe that's the idea about the rain on the individuals, that, there's things individuals need, there's things the community needs, and you kind of have to have that perspective and try to see the full picture. Okay, those are some random thoughts about this. Okay, we're going to continue. Rish Lakish savar matar b'shvil yachid, right? In light of this whole thing about Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan, Rish Lakish having to agree with Rabbi Yochanan about this issue that rain can come on behalf of an individual, and he proved it from a different verse. Amar Rish Lakish, minayin lematar b'shvil yachid, right? That's how we got off on this whole tangent, because we were on Rabbi Yochanan talking about the individual. That's how we got to Moshe. But wait, Parnasah doesn't come for individuals, but what about Moshe? So now we're back to Matar B'Shvil Yachid. So he says, Dichtiv sha'alu me'Hashem matar be'et malkosh. Okay, here's a verse in Zechariah also. Ask for God for rain in the time of the malkosh, and the last rains when they're supposed to come. Hashem oseh chazizim. God makes clouds. Notice, by the way, this is the only word in plural in the verse. Okay, everything else is singular. We're going to get back to that to explain why does it say chazizim, clouds, plural form. Umatar geshem yitain lahem. He'll bring them rain. Leish esev basadeh, for the person in his grass, in his field. So yacholakol, you might have thought God brings rain for everybody. But Talmud lomar leish, God can even bring for a person. Tanya, and there's a further bright on this, ileish yacholachostota. If you're saying God could bring rain for one individual, you would assume it means for all of the person's fields. But Talmud lomar sadet, it says field in singular, which means maybe God could bring rain only for one person and for one of that person's fields. At least you would think, though, for the field, for the entire field. Talmud lomar esev. It says, no, for grass, meaning even a small part in someone's field, God could bring rain just for that. And we're going to see that it means that God could bring rain just in one area of one person's field, just there, if that's what's needed. Okay. And then we're going to see Kihada Rav Daniel Bar Katina. We're going to see a person where this happened to him. He had a little garden, or a big garden, I don't know. Every day we'd go out and check it, see how it's doing. He said, look, this row needs rain and this row doesn't need rain. And what rain came and just came in the areas that needed water. Because again, too much water could ruin it. So he got exactly what he wanted. And here you see that God could bring rain just for one individual in one place, right? This is hard to understand because usually rain, right? It kind of goes, it's not usual that it rains in one place, but not another, although it does happen sometimes, right? I've been places where someone just a few minutes from me will say it's not raining and it's raining where it is by me. So it's possible. This is a little bit extreme though, to say in one field, one little area, and not another. So if we already quoted this pasuk, what is it talking about? And why is that specifically in plural where everything else, geshem, matal, all of that in that verse is singular? Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina, melamed shekol tzadik v'tzadik hakadosh baruch hu oseh lo chaziz b'fnei atzmo. This is a beautiful idea. Every righteous person has their own cloud in the heavens that if they need rain, that cloud rains down on them. My chazizim, again, this could be more metaphorical, and that, there's this protection, right? And it's interesting. We're talking about the ananim. It just dawned on me. We talked about the ananei kavod of Aharon, right? Where ananim usually are things that bring rain, but here it was really the clouds of protection. Maybe it's talking about that, although it really does seem to be talking about rain. My chazizim, why chazizim? Amar Rabbi Yehuda porchot. Okay, they're blossoming. Okay, we don't really know what that means yet. Amar Rabbi Yochanan siman lematar porchot. when you see clouds that are in this formation of porchot, that's a sign that the rain is coming. My porchot, what is that? You have to remember this, that this is a sign the rain is coming. We're going to see a story about that. My porchot, Amra Papa, Eva Kalisha Tute Eva Smichta. It means thin clouds under thick clouds. When you see up above very thick clouds and up below thinner clouds, you'll know that the rain is coming. So now they say, Amar Rav Yehuda, Nihila Mekame Mitra, another sign, Ate Mitra, Batar Mitra, Pasik Mitra. If you have a drizzle before the big rains, then that's a sign, and as the drizzles come before it starts raining, that's a sign the rains are coming. If the drizzle comes after a big rain, that's a sign that the rain is stopping. So again, this is all, you have to look at the perspective, where it's coming, what it is. Drizzling doesn't always mean the same thing. Depends when it is. Now they say, Mekame mitra ate mitra. So before the rains, it's the sign the rains are coming. V'simanech meholta. What's the siman to remember this? Like a sieve. What happens in a sieve? Rashi gives one explanation, which I found very hard to understand. I'm going by a different explanation I saw, which is that when you put things in a sieve, what happens? A little bit before you even start sifting it, some of the flour starts coming out. That's the drizzle. Then you really start sifting and a ton comes out. So that's the drizzle before the rains. That's how you remember it. This one's a little more grotesque. Okay, the feces of a goat comes out, right? First you have the big rains, it comes out a lot, and then then little ones come out at the end when they're finished. That's a kind of grotesque one. There is another explanation that it's actually talking about milking, okay? Milking the cows and the goats, and that when you milk them, a lot comes out at first and then a little bit drips out after. Okay, but that's not what most people think that charya means. Okay, yet Rashi, I saw someone wrote me in the chat with Rashi. I know what Rashi says, but it's weird because Rashi said first the fine comes out, then the coarse, but it doesn't really make sense because in a sieve, the coarse never comes out. So that's why I didn't understand Rashi as well. Okay, next. Ula ikla lebafel. Now we get a great story with Ula. We have a lot of interesting stories about rabbis and really the theme about these stories is rabbis being embarrassed, right? We started with Rabbi Yochanan, who the nephew stood him up, basically knew something he didn't know. Then we went to Rav Papa, whose students didn't like his explanations or asked him questions that he didn't have answers to. And now we're going to see Ula, who here it's not Torah, okay? It's about general knowledge or whether rain is coming or not. But Ula, and also kind of as different from the Rabbi Yochanan story, Rav Papa kind of stepped into Rava's shoes, right? He was kind of not on his own home turf anymore. He was kind of supposed to be the new leader. And here Ula comes from Eretz Israel. He was born in Israel, and he goes to Babylonia, where he's a bit of an outsider, right? So you go to a new city, and we're going to see what happens to him. He gets to Babel, Chaza Porchot. He sees these Ananim Porchot that we already said is a siman that the rains are coming. So what does he say? He tells everybody, he says, Amar Lahu Panu Mane Dahashati Mitra. Everybody bring your vessels inside because the rain is coming. Well, he gets a little embarrassed. L'soflo ate mitra. No rain comes. Okay. And he looks like a bit of an idiot, right? Here he said the rain is coming and he's this outsider. He comes from afar. Here comes this guy. He thinks he knows what he's talking about, right? This is very clear, by the way, that it could be that, things are different in Babylonia. The signs are not the same as they are in Israel. So Amal, he says, what's his reaction? How does he kind of, put himself back in place? Although I don't know if this is the right way to do it. Okay, this is a strong line, and we've seen lines like this where people call them bavlai tipshai, you stupid Babylonians, and things like that. Right? It was a big thing, this jealousy which were, arguing between the Babylonians and the Eretz Israelis. So he says, just like the Bavliim lie, their rains lie too. Okay, it actually reminds us of the posket staka, and they don't give, right? They say they're going to give staka and then they don't. That's the sign of the clouds that they're going to bring rain and then they don't. It says it was clear it was going to rain, right? It's just their clouds must be lying as well. Okay, and he puts them down. This is sometimes when people are struggling, right? They put someone else down to make themselves look better, even though I'm sure that line didn't go over well by the Babylonians. Another story, Ula Ikla Bavel. Chaze, this actually is the story we saw in Pesachim already. You might remember it once we start to tell it. He comes to Bavel. Chaze Melot Sana de Tamre Bezuzah. He goes to the shuk. He says, wow, you could buy a whole jar of dates or a whole basket of dates for one zuz. Amar, Malet Sana Dedusha Bezuza, Ubavlai Lo Aske Bo'oraita. He says their food is so plentiful and yet they don't learn Torah. Like we in Israel, we struggled with our parnasah, having money to buy things. That's why we don't, we manage to learn Torah, but it's hard. We have to work. But these guys, they have food, b'shefa, tons of it. And yet they're not learning Torah. Well, he obviously ate too many dates. Palayla tziaruhu, he gets, right, he becomes sick, big stomach ache. Amar malot sana de sakina bezuza. Ubavle aske bo'oraita. He changes his whole line. He says, wow, you could get for a zuz a big basket full of knives that cut my stomach into pieces, right? And he says, and yet they still learn Torah? Like, wow, if this is the food they eat and they get sick from it, right? It must be. And it's amazing that they actually manage to learn Torah. So he does this switch, right? Because he realizes that he's not a native and he doesn't understand what's going on. This, by the way, is very common. People, certainly here, and I'm sure this is the same in other places, but I've seen it a lot in Israel where people make aliyah and they're whole sick the first year because all sorts of things affect them, right? They pick up all these diseases and stuff. He was coming from afar and it didn't agree with him, the local cuisine. So anyway, that's Ula's stories of his reactions to things when he gets to Eretz Israel. Again, I think it's an issue of perspective, understanding things are different places, seeing the whole picture. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. We're going to end today's daf with a big debate, and there's a nice footnote in the Quran that talks about, a side note in the Quran that talks about how rain is something that even nowadays, right, people are still struggling to understand where it comes from, and the rabbis were struggling with the same thing about the amazement of rain and how does it work? Where does the water come from? So we're going to have this big debate. Does the water come from the depths of the earth and they evaporate, right? And then because when they evaporate, they basically get up to the heavens, or do they come from the heavens into the clouds and from there come down to us? So Rabbi Eliezer Omer, here's a bright. Okay, drinks from the ocean water. In other words, all the waters, the rainwater comes from the ocean. Here we're going to quote from Breshit, from the creation of the world. In other words, all this aid came up, it evaporated, right? And from there, it gave water to all of the ground. How did it come? In the form of rain. So that's not a good proof. The water is salt water from the oceans, and the water that comes down from the rain is not salt water. They get sweetened in the clouds. Okay, a process happens to them, and they change from being salty to sweeter. No, there's water up in the heavens, and it gets its water from the heavens. Okay, from the rains of the heavens, you will drink water, meaning from the heavens. There you see, it comes from up above. So what does he get from that pasuk? He says that the clouds really come from the ground, okay, and then they float up to the heavens. And they open their mouths like a flask. And then they get rainwater if they fill up with rainwater. And then they have holes in the clouds like a sieve. We keep having this image of the sieve. And then they drip the water down onto the earth. Okay, that the water drips down from the heavens. So that's his proof. Then he says, not only that, which is really saying two things. Number one, each tipa is individual, but the distance between them is like a hair, what do you call it? The thickness of a hair. Okay, very thin, very little difference between them, but they're separate, a hair's breadth, thank you. But there's separate drops. We've seen this before, right? The day of rain is like creation of the world. We're going to have the same verses we quoted earlier. Right? God does greatness and it can't be understood properly, right? It's so hard to understand. God brings rain on the land. That's said one right next to the other. Meaning in the context of rain is this word en chekel. By the creation of the world, right? We can't possibly understand what he did when he created the world. Okay, now they're going to bring two sources and say, according to who does this match? So we have this debate between them. We have what each one did with the others first. He waters the mountains from the aliyah, from up above. Rabbi Yochanan me'aliyotav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right, from the aliyot up in the heavens. Kiman, that obviously goes to Rabbi Yoshua, who said the water comes from above. The Rabbi Eliezer, what's he going to do with it? It started down below, but then it went up above. Once it went up above, now we're describing, well, it came from above and comes down to earth, but it obviously started from down below. And he says, and I'll prove it, because in the curses at the end of Sefer Dvarim, it says, Avak va'afal min hashamayim. It's going to rain down dust and dirt from the heavens. Now, dust and dirt don't come from the heavens, for sure not. Right? Where are you going to find that? Obviously, it started from down below. It went up to the heavens, and therefore it was said it came from the heavens. But not everything that says it comes from the heavens actually started there. So therefore, hachanami, likewise here, since the water, again, evaporated, went up from right to above, but it's not that it really comes from there. Now, God gathers the waters like I forget the word kined, like someone can help me, but they come from the depths like a mound. Okay, so he gathers them together like a mound. Right, the tahom, the depths, right? That's where his big storage houses of water are. So the tehomot. That's who caused all this to be filled? The tehomot. So there you have, obviously, Rabbi Eliezer says it all comes from the depths. For Rabbi Yoshua, what will he say? That is describing what happened in the creation of the world. Originally, the waters were in the ground, in the depths, and then God brought them up. But from then on, they've been up above. They don't come from evaporated water from the oceans. Okay, so there you have this big debate, which is a fascinating debate, right? And again, it's talking about the wonders of the world, things that we can't really properly understand. Doesn't mean we should stop and not attempt to understand them. And maybe that's an interesting message of today's stuff. Just because we don't understand them doesn't stop us from trying to understand them. And with that, I will wish everyone a very good week, a good day, a good week. We'll meet up tomorrow.